Right, sup there everyone, just some ordinary dude here, and I'm once again joined by everyone's favourite dosser, Fictional Media Bully. How are you?
I'm quite enjoying these non-Loud House podcasts, but there you go.
Yeah, I know. I've had a bit of a break, to be fair. I've hardly posted anything on the Loud House wiki or Reddit in the last 2 weeks, so there you go.
Okay, so this is not going to be about some first-rate children's program. This is going to be about the golden age of a certain video game series.
Oh yeah, Crash Bandicoot. You know, the game franchise that took the world by storm in the late 1990s. Much like how Mario was the king of the 80s and Sonic was the king of the early 90s, by the late 90s, Sony came on the market with the PlayStation 1, and with it, its arguably biggest franchise at the time, Crash Bandicoot, completely took over the gaming world for a few years.
It was one of the biggest ones, alongside Tomb Raider and Resident Evil and Gran Turismo and Final Fantasy.
I would say in that time period, Crash would have been the mascot at the time. Maybe not now, but yeah.
Crash Bandicoot is fascinating in just how it even came to be because it was one of the earliest mainstream 3D platformers ever.
Oh yeah. I mean, it came out around the same. Well, it came out in 1996, the first Crash game, didn't it? Around the same time as both Mario 64 and Sonic 3D Flicky's Island, or Sonic Blast.
Sonic 3D Flicky's Island is a 2D game, but with 3D isometric perspectives or whatever. But yeah, actually, it was released in 96 alongside Super Mario 64, Tomb Raider, and Bubsy 3D.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Bubsy 3D, the game that you keep shitting on every 5 minutes. I've never actually played it, but you seem to go on about it.
It's a very clunky game, but whatever, it was one of the earliest attempts.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, if you lived in the UK, Crash Bandicoot and Tomb Raider were the only ones in 96. We had to wait another year for Mario 64 and Bubsy 3D.
Yeah. So, at the time, obviously, Crash was a very big sort of revolutionary thing, you know.
I wouldn't call it revolutionary, but whatever.
Well, yeah, in terms of it was one of the first 3D games, and it was a big hit commercially, obviously. But yeah, so if we go through our thoughts, well, there's only really 4 Naughty Dog games, so we'll go through each one. So obviously, we'll start with the original Crash Bandicoot.
Did you know that during the development of the first Crash game, it was given a joke codename called Sonic's Arse Game?
Oh, that's interesting.
Because basically, the camera perspective shifting to a forward one rather than a side one.
Oh yeah, because
obviously you're always looking at the character's rear.
Because obviously Crash, you could argue, is sort of based on Sonic a little bit. It's like a sort of, furry main character who runs and jumps around a lot with a spin attack, and everything, and all that sort of thing, and an evil mad scientist that he's fighting against. Except Cortex doesn't make robots out of animals; he just makes mutants out of animals. But yeah, it's pretty much the same fucking thing, except Crash doesn't move as fast. But whatever, it's different. He has crates instead of rings, and he eats Wampa fruit.
Well,
an apple a day keeps the doctor away, everyone. Yeah. But yeah, so Crash Bandicoot 1. And we'll be talking just about the original versions, not the Insane version, because that was years later. But talking about the original 1996 Crash Bandicoot game by Naughty Dog. It's one of those where it was a big game at the time, I suppose. I think it's a okay to solid game. Now, FMB here thinks very differently. He's pissed off the entire Sony subreddit before about this. He really doesn't like Crash Bandicoot 1, do you?
Crash Bandicoot 1 is very lovely to look at, and it has it's very nice to look at. I love the environments, and Crash is an appealing character, but the gameplay is very shallow and second-rate, essentially.
Well, some parts of the game are better than others. I do like some.
I mean, the whole game is at best mediocre.
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far. I mean, Crash 1 has a lot of problems. Don't get me wrong. So obviously, it had issues with its save states and You know,
there's the obvious issues that even critics at the time mentioned, like the inefficient save system.
Yeah.
Or
that's something the Insane version did fix. But yeah, the original Crash, you had to like access bonus stages and beat them to save the game at a certain point. And it's like, why can't you just save it after every level?
As well as the fact that when you're going for 100%, you cannot die a single time when getting the gems.
Yeah, that would be a bitch, especially because some of the levels are pretty damn hard.
Honestly, on its own is not a problem. I can understand the increased challenge. It's just that, well, the gem is like the only other thing besides unlocking levels to reach the end. So why are we suddenly going from one objective to 3 objectives?
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's because it's turning the game from easy mode to hard mode once you beat it casually.
The only time it makes sense is for the color gems, because naturally the color gems are more valuable.
Yeah.
So you want an extra stipulation to make getting them worth it.
I will say this, like, obviously with Crash 1, it's the game where it's like pretty much, with the exception of the hog riding stages, it's purely platforming. Like, it really is like absolute just platforming ideas put into levels. With some better results than others. Now, obviously, a lot of people have complained about the game for being very hard. You know, it has very many infamous difficult levels from the first game. You know, your slippery climbs, your sunset vistas, your jaws of darkness, the lab, and so on. Not to mention a cut level, Stormy Ascent, which you can now play on DLC on the Insane version, but it still exists in the original game. You just have to hack it to access it. And that was so hard it was cut from the game. And Sunset Vista was supposed to be even longer and harder, actually, and that's already considered one of the harder levels in the game. And some of the platforming is very intricate and very intense to beat. For kids, it would have been a difficult challenge. I mean, I was able to beat the game casually, not 100% complete it as a kid, but I was able to beat it casually.
Crash 1 casually is not too bad, if a bit like difficult, but the challenge is more often than not artificial. Like, there's a cumbersome flow where a lot of the time you could just like hold forward and just not really worry too much. But then there's like that hazard that is just far away enough from the camera that you can't see. So naturally you just keep holding forward because that's what the game kind of taught you already. Only to kind of just pull a cheap trick and make you die if you like don't immediately turn back or whatever.
I mean, there are tons of problems with the original Crash game, from difficulty to level design to, you know, artificial challenges and weird save states.
It's also finicky in its control, how when you spin, you still retain your momentum.
I never really had that much of a problem with it, but yeah,
it's not a big deal, but it did throw me off when I first played it.
It's never really been noticeable or bothered me that much. But for what it's worth, I still think it's a solid game, if only because it does have some good level design in places. It has some very good challenging platforming parts. Like you say, the game's great to look at. It has great music, great aesthetics and visuals for the time.
I will give it this. I do appreciate the thematic cohesion when you're going through the levels. How it starts off all in the jungle environments, but as you gradually make your way to Cortex, the environments become more man-made and industrial.
Yeah, like you start in the jungle, and then you sort of go to ancient ruins in the second island, which is man-made but abandoned. And then,
the game overall does utilize abstraction quite well in its story to let the journey do the narrative talking. And so when something like, say, the Warthog comes up, it adds a little bit of excitement, essentially.
Yeah, but obviously,
even though when doing a casual run, there's only one Warthog level, which is a bit disappointing.
Yeah, because the other one's unlockable.
It's my favourite part of the game.
Yeah, fair enough. But
it's a bit stiff, but perfectly fun.
But obviously, they would then recycle that in the sequels. So Crash 2. Now, you have a really harsh opinion on this game. I've got to be honest. Everybody likes Crash 2 except you. I mean, it's not perfect. It has flaws, but honestly, it improves a lot. Even you've got to admit, it improves a lot from the first game. It does a lot of things or better.
Oh, certainly. I do acknowledge from a gameplay and aesthetics point of view, Crash 2 is a step up from the first game. Like, for one thing, the animations are so much better.
Oh, absolutely. And on top of that, yeah,
according to the developers, like Andy Gavin, who was like one of the heads of Naughty Dog, said when working on Crash 2, he built a brand new game engine that was 3 times faster than the one that was used for Crash 1, which overall allowed the developers to really express themselves a lot more in the design and the animations and such.
But on top of that, a lot of the things that were a bit off-putting about the first game, like obviously the bad save state system. Again, in Crash 2, they fix all these things. You've now got warp rooms where you can save the game anytime after you beat a level. You don't have to access a bonus or special stage to get to do it. And also, Crash 2 did something a bit different for the time, where instead of purely playing the game in a linear fashion, now you have a choice of 5 different levels each time you beat a boss, and you can play them in whatever order you like, which does allow you to have a customize your own flow of the game, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. It can help. Like, say there's a level that you play and it's like really difficult.
Yeah, and you're like, okay,
kind of avoid that for a bit and just try on an easier level.
Yeah, like say you get in Warp Room 4, and you really hate the B levels, don't you? And also Cold Hard Crash, but there's also a couple of other relatively easier and maybe more fun levels. So you've got the last of the sewer levels, and you've also got the ruins level, which are maybe a little bit less difficult, so you could always go to beat them first, psych yourself up, and then go for those harder stages.
The best levels in Crash Bandicoot 2, I would say, are by far the polar bear levels, like the one where you're riding the baby polar bear. Like that is the only gameplay style in the game where I don't have any issues with its control and collision detection. It's actually surprisingly polished, fast. It's basically the Warthog, but on steroids, and a lot more interesting and creative.
And also, what's interesting about that is that at the same time as you get the polar bear riding levels, you also get the snowball levels in the same environment. And in the first 2 of those, you get they play out like the Crash 1 boulder levels where you're running away from the giant snowball. But then suddenly, in the third of those levels, a giant polar bear just suddenly starts chasing you, and you're like, oh shit. And then, obviously, at the very end of that stage, you end up on a small polar bear riding away from a bigger polar bear, and you're like, oh fuck.
That's definitely one of the better moments of the game.
Although saying that, it becomes a lot less interesting once you realise that when you're riding the small polar bear, the big polar bear is not programmed to be able to catch you. It's just purely in your head. All you've got to do is focus on the small polar bear.
I mean, that's pretty obvious, even like the first time playing it.
I don't think the big polar bear can catch the small one. Is that right? I've never experienced that. I think they're programmed to run at the same speed.
Yeah. So even with these improvements, why is Crash 2 a game I can't really get into?
Because you don't like Crash.
The main issues I have with the game are control and collision related, essentially. Like, yes, the level design is a bit more interesting, but one thing I noticed is that somehow, compared to the first game, a lot of them are more cramped and narrow, which, unfortunately, somewhere in the coding, you can easily get... somewhere in the coding, the Crash games seem to be coded where if you touch any part of the terrain, like on the left or right side, you're stuck or whatever. Like,
really?
like what I mean is like pressing a direction towards a terrain.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any issues with that in the first and third games because honestly, the levels were with the first game, most of the time you're just holding forward.
Yeah.
With 3, the level design is less narrow, so it's not really noticeable. But in Crash 2...
I've never noticed this. I mean, to be fair, the original version of Crash 2, I'm just going to say I've only ever played through it once. The rest of my experience has been through the insane version. But I don't ever remember...
I've played it far more times than you, I could definitely say that much.
I've never experienced that problem, to be honest.
It's just that with Crash 2, there's a lot more moving left to right compared to the first game. But when you have levels this cramped... it just makes the sticky terrain a lot more noticeable, and this got me killed in several instances, like in Cold Hard Crash, where after I dealt with a death road and I was hoping for a checkpoint nearly. I was trying to take it slow, and when I was like being a little bit patient, waiting in like near a spot where the crushing log is, suddenly Crash was stuck to a bit of terrain when I was just trying to move right, and I ended up panicking and therefore ended up falling to my death anyway.
Wow.
And speaking of which, Crash 2 at its worst is painful. Genuinely
I know
painful.
where you're going with this. You've took, a lot of the back. There's a lot of backtracking in certain parts of the game, particularly when you're going for the completionist mode.
Like the backtracking is annoying, but I'm more speaking like when the game suddenly like changes its rules on how the death routes work. Like I don't mean as in like the one hit thing. What I mean is like in like several situations, you're suddenly forced to like go through the death route if you want to get the box gems.
And then
so you're basically doing 4 objectives for something that is a reward.
And is there
value
one level?
of 2.
I think at the end of the game, is it one of the piston it away levels or spaced out where you have to go all the way through the death route, get the gem, go all the way back, and come back through the normal part of the level? Is that? I think
No, you have to go through the normal bit, break the one box that's like very far away from it, and then get to the death route. Right. Yes, you can step on the death route to make sure it's always there, even after dying. But I really shouldn't need to do that. It's so cumbersome.
Yeah, I mean, again, I've played Crash 2 a lot less than the other two, but for what it's worth, I acknowledge it still has problems. But for me, Crash 1 was already an okay game, and for me, Crash 2, while still not perfect, is honestly a great game for me. I mean, I get it's got its problems. I get it's got its problems, but it still does a lot of things right. And to be fair,
get this in a couple of the gem. In a couple of the routes, there's one secret route and one gem route. The collectible gem is near the beginning of said route instead of the end, logically.
Right.
So it's like, alright, just get the gem, kill myself, and then move on with the rest.
Yeah.
And in that one gem route, like, it's in the sewer level, like, there's, like, these arrow boxes that bounce you up, but you collide with the ceiling, making it needlessly difficult to navigate this area. You end up falling in the electric water anyway, because... Again, artificial difficulty.
Right.
Like, I mean, just unnecessary collision when there doesn't need to be any.
I get it, Crash 2 still has its problems, but I still admire all the improvements it's made, all the good gameplay elements that are there. Again, it's still got the great aesthetics and visuals. You know, its physics are generally okay, I think, here. It adds a few different things to the gameplay. And you know, I'm sure you're not. You could go on for hours, but yeah, and obviously, also
just one more thing. I'm not entirely done. The one area too is actually a step down. Is the story, the narrative?
Well, to be fair, Crash 1, there isn't even really much of a story aside from Crash has got to get Torna back.
Yeah, but the thing is, with the first game, it's so simple that it implements abstraction, where it's like the journey is telling the story. And then in the second game, you get a poor attempt at a twist villain story.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, it's obvious Cortex is the villain. I mean, it's called Cortex Strikes Back, and his evil face is on the cover of the game.
It doesn't help. Like, it's like, alright, the narrative contrives the game rather than contextualizes it. Yeah. And there isn't even a theme to the game. Like, the most I gather is that it's probably set in the winter season because there's so many snow levels. Possibly. But even then, you're just kind of going from different level theme to another with no cohesion.
Yeah, well, I suppose that is one thing that Warp did improve on, because in that, obviously, it's time travel, there's a theme in it. Yeah.
With Crash 2, it's basically a disjointed collection of interchangeable going through the motions challenges, pretty much. The only exception are the space station levels. That one is actually set up well, and it is the final stretch of the game, so there is payoff. Which, funnily enough, coherently contextualizes the jetpack.
Yeah. That's pretty
because the jetpack is like one of the first things you see in the game, like before the title screen.
Yeah.
And the space station setup means, okay, we're going to use this mechanic eventually, and it makes sense to use it in the anti-gravity segments.
Yeah, that makes sense. And of course, you even use the jetpack in the final boss and everything. Well, such as the final boss is, it's just hitting
the final boss is not too bad from a narrative standpoint, I guess. It is pretty cool seeing Crash use a jetpack to catch up to Cortex and like make him like float in outer space for good. Even though the boss itself is pathetically easy, though, to be fair...
Yeah, it's like, to be fair, like, after boss 4, like, Engine's quite difficult. And, like, you think, oh, after that, the final boss has got to be a big epic thing, right? Not particularly, no. I won't
Narratively speaking, it is. Gameplay-wise, not really.
No. I mean, yeah, but obviously then, yeah, Crash 2, it has its flaws, but it did improve a lot from the first game. If nothing else, the groundwork was there. This framework was set up for another third game, another sequel, to really capture Crash at its peak. And that brings
I respect Crash 2 as being, like, essentially setting the groundwork for a much better game, which is Crash Bandicoot 3.
I mean, I still think Crash 2 is really good, even if it has problems.
But Crash Bandicoot 3, if someone asked me, are you a Crash fan? I would say, I don't like Crash Bandicoot. I like Crash Bandicoot Warped and Crash Team Racing.
And now you might like Crash Twinsanity, which you're playing.
I'm still trying to get through a little bit, but whatever. Yeah. But yes, Crash Bandicoot 3 is the one to get it all right. The gameplay is polished to a T. The terrain collision is consistent.
And not only that, but it's like there's actually a bit more of a story to it. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not a Shakespearean story or anything, but like what you just said with Crash 2, okay, yeah, as much as the level variety is nice to play through, at the same time it's very disjointed and it's just a lot of random changing environments. But with Crash 3, you've got a theme because it's a time twister machine. You're travelling through time to collect the crystals before they were collected in Crash 2, I guess.
It also helps that the setup is simple, like no arbitrary twisting or trying to be non-cliche or whatever.
Kruger's here, he's the main new villain now, Cortex works for him, and all these other mad scientists and guys work for him as well. They're all pretty good villains as well, like Dingo Dial and Tropy are introduced in this game, and they're two very good, memorable villains. You've got Engine back, and Tiny, gets a bit more time to shine, I guess. So
yeah, Crash 3 once again employs abstraction in its narrative, like Crash 1. So how good the narrative is depends on like what you're doing in the game.
But even then, it's like with Crash 1, there's no real but you get the beginning cutscene and you get the ending. But with Crash 3, you do get an ongoing narrative, sort of, because you get those time twister messages. Where every couple of levels you get a message from either Aku Aku or Cortex or one of the villains, and it just builds things up. It builds up, boss encounters and game progression and stuff like that. While also setting up the characters.
Is really good.
It also builds characterization for all these people that are in it, and it's actually really well done. Crash 2 did that as well, but again, it was obviously it built up like Cortex and Coco and Brio and all that in the head scenes, but obviously it was focusing on a sort of contrived plot twist and everything that didn't work. But with Crash 3, it's done even better here. And on top of that, here's the one thing I think people contest about Crash 3. When people argue that it's not the best, their usual argument is there are a few too many vehicle levels. And that's the thing. Remember when I said Crash 1 had the most pure platforming? Well, Crash 2 had, again, mostly platforming, but it did implement a bit more variety in gameplay styles. You had a bit more vehicle stuff. You had the polar bear, you had the water skiing thing, you had the jetpack, and so on. And obviously in Crash 3, they really pushed what they could get away with. I think, on average, every warp room had, I think, just over half of the main levels, not including the unlockables, were platforming levels. And almost half of them, I think it was like 60% platforming and 40% vehicle levels at this point. Like usually 2, occasionally 3 levels in a warp room would be vehicle. So you obviously had the tiger riding levels, which is basically the same as the polar riding levels, but with Coco this time.
The thing is, Crash 3 is one of the best examples of how to do it, because again, the narrative contextualizes it, the time traveling stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, in underwater levels, you're going to want to go to scuba diving. In the pirate levels, you're going to be on the sea. You're going to be riding on the ocean. If you're in the Great Wall of China, it might be quicker to use a pet tiger to get through it, and pretty that much. Sort of thing. And so that kind of makes sense.
It also gives Coco a lot more agency.
Well, I mean, because they didn't give her. She was playable for the first time in this game, but it wasn't until Wrath of Cortex where she would be available for platforming. She was only used in some. It was the vehicle levels were almost like an excuse to give Coco something to do, because for some reason they didn't want to have a female character be the platforming. I don't know.
I kind of like as a teenager, I would have liked Coco in platforming levels, but in retrospect, I think it makes more sense. Like Crash is the muscle, and Coco is like the engineered stuff, kind of like that.
Well, obviously in later games they'd make out she was a martial artist, so yeah. And then in the Insane versions, you can play as her pretty much in almost all the levels, except for I think the boss fights. And in Crash 4, you can just play as her entirely.
But yeah, Crash Bandicoot Warped has a lot of gameplay variety, and again, like I said, the narrative coherently contextualizes it. With Crash 2, like the jetboard just kind of feels forced, like just a different thing to do in this like interchangeable series of challenges and a contrived narrative or whatever. Whereas in Crash 3, because of a strong theme and like the fact that like the setup and payoff mean like being simple means the journey is the story. Naturally, with a lot of gameplay variety, the adventure you get is very jam-packed, exciting, and just very like bombastic in a way where it's like the Bandicoots are really doing pretty much everything as they're time traveling, and it's the kind of narrative that's just very inspiring to a child playing it essentially.
Okay. Well, we're getting
and it also helps that the gameplay variety is consistently solid. Like the worst one is probably the motorbike, because like in isolation they're good, they're well designed. Well, probably except for Road Crash, that one tight turn is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But they are a bit of a difficulty spike compared to the rest of the game. But even then, once I got used to it, I didn't have any like serious control collision issues like I did with the entirety of the platforming in Crash 2. Yeah. It was consistent once I got the hang of it. It's like I didn't die because of anything cheap like that. It was just a learning curve to get over, and once I did, it was very satisfying.
Okay, well that's cool. Well, we're getting up to nearly half an hour, and we've still got one more game to go. So yeah, in summary, Crash 3 pretty much does almost everything right. Even if it has some more vehicle levels, they contextualize well, and most of them are generally very fun to play. And it just is a really good game, really great, phenomenal game all around.
It's also the only one that genuinely innovated on the action platforming genre, because the time trial stuff, it's basically, it's Sonic, but now you're rewarded with a collectible for going fast.
Yeah.
But like, when I look at Crash Bandicoot 1 and 2, all I just see are second-rate Donkey Kong Country knockoffs.
Like, shut up, you tart.
Like, if I've played Donkey Kong Country, I've already played those games. Whereas with Crash Bandicoot 3, get this, there's only one Crash Bandicoot 3. There's really no other game like
anyway.
It.
I mean, I did base a Loud House game after it, so you never fucking know.
Oh my gosh, let's move on. Crash Team Racing, one of the best kart racing games I've ever played.
I mean, it is basically just a rip-off of Mario Kart, but it is done really, really well.
And again, innovates on it, like the time trial system. Again, this is one of the rare games I actually even bother with time trials.
Yeah, I mean, I never really bothered with it. I only ever played it casually, but yeah.
Like, you're given a reason to do it, like unlike the Mario Kart game, where it's just there to just be bragging rights or whatever.
Yeah, but obviously with Crash Team Racing, it's generally got very good physics and level design. Again, aesthetically, it's really nice to look at. Music's good, same as with the other Crash games. I suppose the one weaker aspect is the story. There's not really much of a story going on.
The story is a bit middling, and also continuing from Crash 3, like, is it supposed to be a continuation, like, after a normal ending?
Well, supposed to.
Or the secret ending?
Well, I don't know. Well, now that Crash 4 is out, obviously it's not, because that immediately continues after Crash 3, so I don't know. Yeah, I have no idea. Crash continuity doesn't really work anymore, but what if it ever did? But
it's kind of a shame there was continuity when going from 1 to 3, and CTR is kind of the first one to say, yeah, we don't really care about the continuity.
Well, yeah, I mean, this was Naughty Dog's last game, so they were sort of, on their way out, they probably thought, we don't really give a fuck. Well, we'll make a good game because we want to make a good game, but in terms of like story and ongoing continuity, we don't really give a fuck anymore.
Nitrous Oxide was deliberately written as a terrible character.
He basically just goes up and says, I'm going to fuck up your planet if you don't beat me in a race because I'm bored or something. It's like
hey, you lose.
Like, it is one thing, and this might be a hot take because I know it's considered the inferior version, but Crash Nitro Kart, I will say, even though it's not as good game, if there's one thing Nitro Kart does better, it has a better story and it has a better villain. Emperor Velo, played by Steve Lum, is much better than Oxide. I will give it that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, ignoring the story, Crash Team Racing is brilliant. Like, it feels tight to play. The level design is brilliant. Like, and not to mention, like I said, it innovated upon the car racing genre. Like, many of the mechanics Crash Team Racing introduced, Mario Kart wouldn't adopt until the Nintendo Wii installment.
Yeah. So yeah, obviously Crash Team Racing really, sort of reinvented that genre of game franchise, if you want to call it a genre of gaming, I suppose. But
like, it's actually like to be fair, in the 5th generation, like, this is one area where honestly, like, a Mario Kart installment was easily outdone by its competitors. Honestly.
Yeah, fair enough.
Because Mario Kart 64 is not a good game.
Like, yeah, I mean, like, a lot of people would put Crash Team Racing over all the Mario Kart games. I mean, I've never played that many. I've never played a lot of Mario Kart, to be fair, so I don't know, but... Yeah.
I can understand. Crash Team Racing is a dang good game. It's, like, very enjoyable.
Like, for some people, it is the definitive, like, video game kart racing title.
Pretty much. I'm still on the fence if I like it more than, say, something like Speed Freaks as one of the best car racing games on the PS1.
I don't know what that is, so whatever, yeah.
It's really good. You should look it up. It's so fun to play.
Right, I don't really play that many games anymore, but yeah.
So yeah, that was the Naughty Dog Crash Bandicoot era, and it's like after Crash Team Racing, Naughty Dog basically said, "All right, we're moving on from Crash Bandicoot."
And they started doing Jack and Daxter, which was basically a similar-ish sort of thing, but not really.
Yeah. What happened was Naughty Dog made a deal with Universal Interactive Studios to make 3 games. But then Sony got involved with the publishing. Naughty Dog did not have an idea. And the really shitty thing is that despite even though Universal was doing almost nothing, they still got far more of the revenue than Naughty Dog did, essentially. Like, far more money.
So obviously things just fell through at that point, yeah.
And it's like, naturally, it's like, they're obviously going to abandon Crash Bandicoot because it made no sense financially, which is a shame.
So then obviously it went to Traveller's Tales, and their results were a bit mixed, but maybe that's a video for another time.
Oh, I'd certainly love to do one about Crash Bandicoot by British developers.
Yeah, and obviously, you're now playing Twinsanity, which so far, despite its faults, you said you're enjoying, so hopefully that will continue to be the case.
I am quite enjoying so far. It might be my 3rd favourite Crash Bandicoot game already.
Yeah. Well, then again, that's not saying much because you don't think much of any of them other than 2. But
I mean, the Crash Bandicoot series by Naughty Dog, like I said, I don't like the first 2 games.
I like the second one. I'm on the I sort of
more
like
power
the first
to you,
one.
Dude. More power to you. I'm not saying you have to dislike the second game. It is an improvement. I do acknowledge it.
Yeah, if nothing else, if there's one final statement we can make about the Naughty Dog series of Crash, is that it shows improvement in its absolute purest form, because Crash 1, whether you like it or not, has a lot of problems that affect its enjoyability. Crash 2, while still having some problems, improved vastly on it. And then Crash 3 perfected that, well, almost perfected that, and was like peak Crash Bandicoot. And then obviously Team Racing will continue that momentum for one more game in a different genre. But you know what I mean? Like, Naughty Dog continued to improve the quality of their games as they went forward for those few years. And by the end of it, everyone was sad to see them go.
And nowadays, Naughty Dog is generally one of the more celebrated AAA game developers.
Well, yeah, I mean, they just got done making The Last of Us and The Last of Us 2, and they're considered some of the greatest, most critically acclaimed games of all time, and they recently just got a TV adaptation. And speaking of that, Crash Bandicoot's never had a TV series. The closest we ever got was that 1990s advert that some of you have probably seen on YouTube. That little cartoon, where it's like, Crash Crash Bandicoot.
It was meant to be the opening cutscene for the game, actually.
Yeah, but you know, I'm
Tell your
surprised.
friends,
How come they've never done an actual Crash cartoon? I'll write it.
Whatever. So it's like yeah, during the naughty, it's like Crash Bandicoot went from being derivative of other games to actually having an identity, starting with 3 and actually improving on the kart racing genre with team racing, to going through an identity crisis of its own in the turn of the millennium.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame. Just imagine, what if Naughty Dog did stick around with Crash? What do you think could have came of the franchise if it did?
They probably would have made a Jack and Daxter like game with the Crash Bandicoot skin, honestly.
Possibly, yeah. Who knows? Who knows what it would have done? Like, could it have been better or worse, or maybe I don't know. We're never going to know now. But one thing I will say is this: Crash needs another golden age. I want to see
pretty much
a Crash Bandicoot game that's considered one of the greatest games of all time.
Possibly. I mean,
it can happen, despite what this guy here thinks. He doesn't think it can be top tier, but I know it can, and it will happen.
I mean, if Activision can somehow take what they did right with Crash 4 and improve upon it, then maybe that could be a possibility. But whatever.
Yeah, who knows? But for now, I think we'll end it there because we're over half an hour into this video. But yeah, Naughty Dog Crash Bandicoot, definitely memorable, definitely left its mark on the video game industry, and definitely gave us some good games. So yeah, thank you Naughty Dog for bringing Crash Bandicoot to the world. Now I think we'll end it there. And yeah, so hopefully you'll like at least one more Crash game by the time the week's over.
Awesome.